Okay, so just to welcome everybody back to Navigate, which is really a conversation around transitioning. I'm Barry Zworestine, clinical psychologist, and I've worked with military and veterans and some first responders for about 22 years until retiring and stepping back from it this year. So thank you for joining us. And so today we're just going to carry on with the conversation. Thank you again to Sarah for the generosity of supporting me through this process and a wonderful organization, and my good mate Jason, who just adds such invaluable insights into this conversation, which I'm sure will benefit us all. So today, I wanted to look at, as I've often said, preparation. Without prior preparation to the transition process, we're going to get lost. And I mean, I think all of us understand that. We understand that even in the military, you don't get the skill set without hours and hours and hours of training and repetition. Um, ultra marathon running is months and months and months of training to go one race. So everything is about preparation. Everything rests on the foundation of preparation. Last talk, we talked about the warrior acronym and talking about will and discomfort and self-respect and self-compassion. And today I wanted just to reference in the book what I call the book, the SEAL acronym. And I just wanted to go through that briefly. And I think this forms a critical part of the preparation. So the first S I called success, which is how you define and visualize your goals, what it looks like and feels like, identifying strengths and operationalize how you will use these to attain success. It's also important to identify your potential weak links and challenges in the transition process and define what you plan to do to resolve these. So preparation is not just about identifying your strengths, it's also about identifying the potential weak links that can impact on you and activate in the often very stressful and confusing process of transitioning. And for those of you that are using the ebook, at, following that, there are exercises which I really would encourage you, whether you choose to write in the book or not, or write separately on a piece of paper, or just think about it. So for success, the things you are encouraged to think about are: define and visualize your goals. What does it look like? Identify your strengths and operationalize how you will use these to attain success. Identify your potential weak links and challenges, and define the steps you plan to put into place to resolve and be aware of these. And these steps are critical because the weak links you carry into the transition process are very likely to get activated along the way. Um, the next, for E, it's extend, and that's being willing to move out and stretch beyond your area of comfort and learn new skill sets and start again. And this is, I think this is a very important one, where, I often say the world is not waiting for veterans to step back into civilian society. They're not all out there. We have to learn to adjust and adapt to a very new world, a very new language, a very different way of doing things, different jobs, and redefining who we are and the skill sets and jobs we move into. I've often talked about discomfort. And so in being able to extend, nobody can extend without becoming uncomfortable. It is simply not possible. You can't get fitter without putting in the hard work. You can't run longer distances without increasing the distances you run. You can't become a better operator in the military without learning to deal with discomfort, because in discomfort, it's physical, it's psychological, it's mental, and it's emotional. And all of those strengthen who we are. I often say it's like a fire. We use fire to cook. And so when we transition, we have to go through fires to be cooked to prepare for the changes that are awaiting us. There's seeds, I don't know in America, but certainly in Australia and South Africa, we call it fynbos. And it's a specific kind of plant where the seed only germinates after bushfire. So, if we look at the transition process in the same way, without a fire, we stay the same. And I think a lot of us are fire avoidant. We don't want heat. We want to stay comfortable, which equates to locking yourself at home, eating too much, sleeping too much, drinking too much, and it's what I call a slippery slope down into that very dark place. So extending is critical, but we need to look at, as we transition, what are we willing to do to extend? We may think cognitively we love this idea of extending, but when you hit the wall of resistance and challenge and confusion, do you have the resources to be able to do that? And I always get back to ultramarathon running. I like the idea of it, but I'll be honest, I didn't like the reality of it. And not so much the reality of running the race. Well, yeah, even that was a major challenge, but the reality of training. I chose to do something, but what was demanded to transform my will and my ability to run and to continue the journey when there was nothing left. And, it's not just about ultramarathon running, but in transitioning, who are you when there is nothing left? Who are you when you go back to your small unit, you're tired, finances are low, you're struggling with depression, you're not finding a job, your marriage might have fallen apart. Who are you at that point in time? And what are you willing to do? And sometimes the best you're going to be able to do is maybe even call a mate for help, call a 24-hour line to get some help and to share a conversation. So that extend is, it looks easy, but it's certainly not easy. But we need to be ready for that. The I call adjust and adapt, which is the ability to stay flexible in the process. And that takes the capacity to release what does not work anymore in new territory. So you have to explore your territory and you have to gain knowledge. So again, if all you are doing is running on flat roads, no hills, when you move into territory where there are hills, if you've not trained on hills, it's not going to go down well. And it's the same. The military territory doesn't necessarily adapt or adjust to, well, it doesn't necessarily equate to what it's going to look like in civilian life. So you need to know what you are walking into. What does it look like? What are the demands of writing a CV? Um, Being able to communicate in non-military terms, being able to dress appropriately, being able to interact differently. So everything is about adjusting and adapting. And again, adjusting and adapting means you need to be willing to let go of parts of who you were, and you need to be willing to embrace the fact that there are things you don't know, and are you willing to start again and relearn using the skill sets and tools that you may already embody? And again, it's also about dealing with discomfort. The L I called learn, which is the ability to consolidate all the above. And consolidating your focus on success, your focus on being able to extend, and your focus on being able to adjust and adapt and deal with discomfort and step into change. I say that it's become better at who you already are. It's not about losing who you are. It's not about diminishing or demeaning who you are. We need to separate out that feelings of loss of identity, shame, not feeling competent, and not belonging are not who we are. They're things we struggle with. Who we are still extraordinary human beings. And it's how we become better at that. And that's why I really have a problem with PTS and the D at the end of it. The minute you call somebody disordered, that's a statement on personal. And I don't know for the life of me why we still need to do that. I can manage PTS because post-traumatic stress is fine. But disordered, nobody disordered. I disagree with that. Fine, keep it as a diagnostic category. But the minute a man or a woman calls himself disordered or believes they are, where do you go from there? So I often say that the challenge of change is really, are you willing to create your own opportunities? Now, prior to this morning, Sarah, we heard about this incredible organization um, that reframes the vision of transition into a job completely in military terms. And so they are offering people opportunities to adjust and adapt to who they already are. Sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes we need to create new opportunities and we need to be proactive and think about how we create that change in the transitioning process. Now, Again, in the book, I'd really encourage you to take time and reflect on each of those qualities. And really, I often think mapping it out is really good. Having a visual representation of what's going on in your head shifts the confusion of what's going on in the front of your brain. It makes it visual and it's a map. And we all know in military terms that without a map, you've got no compass. Without a map and a compass, all you've got is a lot of very confusing thoughts bouncing around in your head. Any comments before I jump into the beginning of Mark's book and raise some things that were really, they really blew me away. But Jason, what are your thoughts that came up with those very challenging components of the transitioning process?
I think you bring up some great points that whether we look at like first responders or military, they have wonderful assets. You know, they are highly skilled, trained to do what they do, but being able to articulate what they do into a civilian market is very difficult.
Yeah.
And if I look at like what a non-commissioned officer job is,
Mm.
okay, well, they might say, well, I was a sergeant of such and such. Okay, well, what does a sergeant do? And you break that down into leadership, following up, and so many different things. And so, yeah, you need somebody who understands how to write a curriculum vitae or a resume for them to really pull out those skills
Yeah.
to make them marketable. But one thing, as you were talking, it reminded me, and I think you've seen my presentation on PTSD where I talked about Rambo.
Yes.
And I never thought I would have talked about Rambo First Blood as a great example. But PTSD became a diagnosis in 1980. Rambo came out in 1983. Nowhere in the entire movie did they mention PTSD. But there's a great line in the last 5 minutes of Rambo talking about this is who I was. I was the elite. I was the best of the best, and going all over that. And he says, now here in the States, he says, I can't even park a car. I can't hold a job. And so there needs to be, you know, a means for them to transition their skill sets into the civilian market. And frequently what we see with the military is like, well, we taught you. Oh, you want out? Okay, go. Or they're discharged because they're having maybe some conduct issues because what they were experienced wasn't dealt with.
You know, and I think that Rambo in that room where he was in that absolute place of desperation and grief and loss and hurt and pain is if we don't prepare for the transitioning process prior to the journey beginning, we are seriously at risk. It's like it would have been like me going, nah, I can put on a pair of running shoes and take off for 84 Ks. I can tell you something, I wouldn't, at some point on that journey, I would have blown it. Because even with all the training on that particular uphill race, I got to a point of absolute desperation and pain because I blew an iliotibial. And the only way I could move through that was because I'd spent 6 months preparing for it. And so often we blast off out of the military into civilian life, into this place between, because we've just left, but we haven't quite arrived. And we haven't really prepared or thought about it or mapped it out or had discussions around it. And it's like climbing a mountain without, it's climbing Everest without doing any training. At some point, things are going to go wrong. And even with the training and the understanding and the work we put into the process, at some point, things can go wrong. And the problem is not that things can go wrong, it's what do we do when things go wrong? Because life's going to do what it wants to do. But we have the choice to work out who we are and what we do with what's in front of us. And I think that's a really important message for everybody that's in the process of transitioning. You know, this journey, it's got so many things hiding in the shadows and lurking around corners. And when they come and talk to you, it may be deeply uncomfortable, but that's life. It's what are you going to do with what is facing you? And that's a really good lead in to Mark's book. And I really would like to encourage everybody to buy this book. This is one extraordinary human being. And the first, even it's the introduction. This guy, he says, he talks about, he calls him the hard three. I thought this is really interesting. And he says, point one, there's nothing outside of ourselves that can fix something inside, and vice versa. Which, like, man, that is so spot on. Because we're always looking for solutions outside of ourselves, somebody to rescue us, somebody to pick us up. Um, I think even with faith, sometimes whoever it is you're going to believe in, you're still going to be in a hard, sweaty process. And faith is not there to take it away. Faith's there to give you the courage to walk through it and to transition through it. But you got to do the dirty work, so we got to get down and dirty. So, the lovely thing is as he says, it's not outside of ourselves. And he says, our inner selves properly developed need little help from the outside world in order to flourish. And that was so powerful, because what he's saying to us is that even in your worst moments, there's the possibility to create meaning and purpose, even in desperation. And I think, Elie Wiesel in the concentration camps, there he was sitting in abject, just suffering that's beyond description, yet he found hope. People who've been able to forgive individuals that have impacted powerfully on their lives or their children or their partners and found forgiveness. And I think that is so critical. We have so much power internally, but to really activate that power, we need to start preparing before the journey begins. Point two, he says, optimism is how we think about using our resources, not how hopeful we are that things will turn out for the better, which I love. We live in eternal hope that something is going to come down and it's just going to be okay. Well, faith and hope are very good, but if that's all you're waiting for, it's not going to work. It's like, I remember in the 70s when I arrived in South Africa, we had no buses, as far as I remember, in southern Rhodesia at that time. So I didn't know how to catch a bus. And I got to South Africa, where I started university in 1972. I didn't have a car. So I'm waiting on the side of the road, and the buses are just coming past time after time. And I'm standing in the bus stop. Nobody's picking me up. So for several months, in sheer desperation, I would walk 45 minutes to the university till somebody said to me, "What are you doing?" I go, "I'm standing in the bus stop and nobody stops." They went, "Do you put your hand up?" I went, "No." So I wasn't taught about how to be proactive. I was just expecting that the driver was going to see me and stop and pick me up. And, as a metaphor, if we don't do something, life's going to pass us by. So in the transitioning process, we need to work out all of this stuff. What is our proactivity and our planning and our organization and our understanding and our conversations around what lies ahead of us? And point three, he talks about gratitude, and he says this is the most important virtue to cultivate for high performance, especially during challenging times. And, often in working with veterans who really struggle, we start to try and identify one or two things that they are grateful for, no matter how small. I'm grateful for being alive. I'm grateful for having a roof over my head. In my worst moments in change, in the 5 immigrations, I always say I didn't just transition out the military because, as I said, we didn't really you just kind of fought a war and then blasted off. But I kept transitioning through immigration after immigration after immigration. I think my war and my transitioning challenges went on for 60 years. And even as I've said before, now at my age, I'm transitioning into the fewer years that are left, the aging process, the body changing. So the skill sets in transitioning out the military are the skill sets you will need to use until the day you die, until you take your last breath. It never stops. We never truly arrive. And that's why I really often want to say it's not about arriving in civilian life and adjusting and adapting and then finding yourself and consolidating. That happens. but life will continue to face you with transitioning challenges. And the more you do it, the better you are. And the better you become at when things don't work well. You might have a marriage breakdown or a redundancy, financial challenges 30 years down the line. And when you're sitting in a dark corner watching the walls move in, it's what do you do and who are you and what can you do in that place where you're starting to sweat. So, the skill sets of transitioning are skill sets for life, which is why I love this process. He then says, I call these the hard three because they are not fluffy versions of gratitude, purpose, and optimism that are embroidered on your pillows and doilies. Just, I think one military guy said to me, transition is not a didgeridoo drum beating, dancing around a fire process with a bunch of hippies burning incense. It's pretty, it's hard work, and we need to be very, very grounded in the process. He then says, these three precepts will torment and taunt us. So in the transition process, life's not going to give you nice warm hugs at every inch of the way. It will reinforce and love you, but there are times it's going to torment and taunt you as you've tried for the 30th time, the 300th time to find a job, as you've tried continually to deal with your VA and our DVA and getting your entitlements, battle after battle after battle. So changing is I often say it's a bit like the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis, or what's it called, pupa, the thing it wraps around itself. It's got to fight through it to emerge. It's got to really push and cut its way through. And often, if we try to help it, we damage it. And so there's a critical component in working with the transitioning process and working with others and even your mates, is that we have to be careful about taking things away. We need to walk with and help somebody to find the internal resources to cope. We can walk with them and we can hold them, but we have to be careful about never walking in front of anyone. Walk with someone. By taking away the challenges of a process, we often create weak links rather than stronger links. So these are also the things to be aware of when we accompany others on the transitioning process. He says these are tremendous challenges, but to the degree that they can be tamed, they are game-changing for control of our life and its narrative. It requires a self-distancing from the events that happen to us, which remove our egos. Focus on what matters and bind us with others and give ourselves compassion and permission to be where we want to be. And there are those beautiful components of tribe and self-compassion, and sometimes to understand that, yeah, we are in a tough place. But being in a tough place doesn't say that we are not a good enough human being. Shame does not define us. Guilt does not define us. Trauma does not define us. These are just things we experience on the journey. They are not who we are. They're things that are interwoven inside of who we are. And our challenge is to bring the uniqueness and the strengths of who we are, with or without support, to these components to transform in eventually into something that leads us into a life well lived out of the military. Okay, so that was a long one. And I do get a little bit passionate about it. But Jason, Sarah, anytime, you're this beautiful guiding presence, and anytime you want to come in, just jump in.
You know what came up for me, and thank you for those kind words. Gosh, what you share is always so rich. I mean, I feel like every sentence, I'm right there with you. I just love how you express it. In super simple terms, I think what it reminds me of is when people were serving, there was a mission. You always do it together, and you're trained.
Yeah.
And when you use that idea of, what makes you sweat, and taking that idea, okay, I need the training for that. and let me find people to do it together with.
Yeah.
So it just, I mean, very simple. It's very simple, but I really love how you broke all that down. That's very
Well,
rich.
in the work you do with the tier one operators, there's that balance between, like the Honor Foundation are really working on transitioning people onto really good jobs and all the skill sets around interviewing. And there's also, so that's the external, and then there's also the internal that needs to happen, is the core of who we take into the skill sets you're going to need to be able to use. And they often say in fitness, that the mythological six pack for men and women nowadays is that you can have a six pack, but effectively a six pack is what surrounds the core. And a lot of people have a six pack on the surface, but it's like that, and the core bounces around. It looks good, but there's nothing inside. And so it's the same with life. If the strengths we've got are just superficial, it looks good, but when it's tested by life, the ability to protect the spine, and the spine is our core. It's our core of who we are, our identity and our resilience. If that's not there, then it just looks good. But developing the core, that's hard work. That's hard work.
And that's a really great point. I think like training and doing it together, I am imagining it really does dig deep.
Mm.
But I think
Mm.
just expressing it like that, well, you train for the new mission and you do it with other people, it does sound very superficial. It's not getting into that core like you're talking about. So I appreciate the response, because I mean, that's what gives us energy, is when we deal with those things that are confusing, that we haven't
Yeah.
had clarity yet,
Yeah.
and our map and compass. And yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's like you once said to me, you can train somebody with all the skill sets, but if what's going on deep inside them has not changed, they will often say, I know exactly what to do, but gee, I'm still struggling. It's like what I've often said is that, if we are looking at a more cognitive approach to understanding trauma or challenge, we can have a lot of understanding, but the core of what's happening in our bodies hasn't been worked at. You'll often get the response, which is, I understand everything, but I'm still struggling. So it's that mix between cognitive understanding of our maps, but also sitting down and really doing the hard stuff of the pain and the grief and the loss and redefining ourselves and anger and moral injuries and all of that stuff which live here, but they also live in our bodies. And this is the stuff we don't want to go to, because that's the stuff we have to feel. Often it's easier to think our transition process rather than feel our transition process, because everything comes up. I've often said it and I still stand by it. We don't like discomfort and we don't like grief. And I think the core thing I always say is, if you're going to manage your transition process, every day find a small moment of discomfort that you can potentially manage, but you have to stretch into and do it. Because small moments of discomfort, whether it's getting out of bed, having a cold shower, walking around the block, fetching the post, making a good meal, those small moments build on each other till one day you wake up and you go, wow, I'm activating my life. So, Jason, you're nodding a lot. I know there's a lot going on in that head of yours.
So what was really resounding to me, as you're talking about tier one operators, and then we can break that down to different specialties in law enforcement, EMTs and all that, is they had to go through a training to become that operator. They didn't do it by themselves.
No.
There was someone there to guide them. And so then they were trained and prepared for that mission.
Correct.
And when you transition out of that, they're frequently doing it on their own. They don't have that mentor to guide them, that needs that yelling at them to make them move, or some other thing to make them, to provoke an action.
Yeah.
They're not getting that in a transition. If we look at the military in the United States, you get a DD-214, there you go, you're on your own now. And as you're discussing arguments with VA or whatever, and there's not a clear way to articulate, hey, I'm broken in this way, I need help. And so a lot of people will struggle going through those processes in different ways. But I'm also looking at you talk about immigrating in multiple countries and a loss of identity. Who am I? Where do I belong? And what am I now? And it really makes me go back to Viktor Frankl, who was a renowned doctor, psychiatrist, and he went into the concentration camps because he was Jewish. And he had his manifesto, and he's like, I am this great doctor. And literally, they told him, you are SHIT, and burned everything he had. And he had to look at this and go, okay, that's how I did define myself. But if we look at his man's search for meaning, he had to look inward. And no matter what life is pooping on him, it's his viewpoint of how he's going to accept that. And the first time I've heard about Viktor Frankl's book, I was actually at a conference and they were talking about PTSD. I'm like, how does this relate? And they go, oh, this is how it relates. You know, we have to look at what is my viewpoint of this situation. Am I going to look at the world's against me, or like, yeah, the world's against me, but, you know, I can succeed. I can walk in faith, or however, you know, I'm going to view this. But it's me, as you said, you got to go through it. And I loved your analogy last week, talking about the marathon, that, you know, being carried through. It doesn't say you have to do it on your own power.
No. Yeah. And you know, I think with tribe, it's interesting because there's external tribe. When we transition, we need to identify where are the organizations that we can connect to that are part of our tribe. So we reconnect in, let's say it's a military tribe, but in a different way. The next tribe is, who are your internal figures inside yourself that you can draw on? Because when we internalize the people we love, and when we internalize the strengths we have, there's a confidence internally, which is reinforced by the tribe we have externally. And then the last point of the triangle is where people have faith, because that's your relationship with something bigger than yourself, which is the next tribe. So it's external, internal, and then beyond us and within us. And that circle is what we walk with into change. And I think we have to be realistic that transition, even with everything intact, it doesn't take away the challenge and often the pain and the loss and the grief. It may not take that away, but it's how we walk through the thunderstorms. We can't change a thunderstorm. It's like saying, I don't like cold. Well, you know, it's like cold's not going to go away. It's how you're going to adjust to the cold. And it's the transition process is how we adjust and adapt and make discomfort into something which is meaningful. You know, as I've often said, discomfort is heat. Heat can cook the most marvelous meals, or it can burn. And that's our choice along the journey. I mean, what worked in working with lots of folk, Jason? What are the core components that have helped people in transitioning processes in your experience?
I think when you look at a lot of with trauma, one of the biggest things that people are finding now is peer support. And I love the analogy of a person fell down in a pit and he's help, help, help. And everybody walks by, they don't have ropes, they don't have anything to help them. And this guy jumps in the pit with them. And he says, well, how are you going to help me? You're down here in this pit with me. And he says, yeah, he says, but I was in the pit before, I know how to get out. He says, so I'm going to help you out. And when we can tap into that, somebody, you know, being there by us, again, going back to that tier one operator and training, you need that help. So we can reach out to that peer. You know, it may just be getting, you know, a text from Barry saying, hey, buddy, how you doing? And you're like, oh, that's the motivation I needed today. So the problem is when people isolate and they forget we
Yeah.
don't do this individually. I
Yeah.
need somebody to help push me along. And if we look at diets, weightlifting, all that, they say, you know, when you get somebody to support you, you know, join in this with you, that's when you succeed, because it's hard to do it on your own.
Yeah, and I think that sense of aloneness in the transitioning process is probably one of the hardest things. It's my experience is that so many of the people I've sat with feel so dreadfully alone in that process. And the more they go downhill, the more they isolate, the worse it gets. And you know, even and you know, honestly, as I've always said, I didn't have much of a network because I wasn't, you know, we bombshelled out all over the world. It was only not that long ago where through social media we all started reconnecting with each other. Um, but prior to that, no. And so I found my community in ultramarathon running, but that was an illusion, you know, because I thought when I was running and pushing, I was in the company of my trees and the earth, and they became my community. But that wasn't enough because effectively running away from stuff wasn't going to create the change I wanted. And eventually I was going to have to stop running. And then what? You know, because the trees aren't going to come to me. The earth's not going to come to me. Whereas when we have a tribe of people, they come to us in times of need. So we have to be careful on the transitioning process around what are we choosing to do to give ourselves, one, that dopamine hit, and two, to feel connected. You know, so it could be high risk stuff, but unless it's embedded in a community, high risk stuff will give you a massive dopamine hit and you'll feel good. And it's better than an antidepressant at some level when, you know, unless a medication is prescribed. But at the end of the day, it's simply not enough. We have to be able to reach out and embed in community. We have to reach out and embed in professional support sometimes. And sometimes we have to reach out and put ourselves in a clinic because we're simply not coping. And we need to, for that moment, allow somebody just to hold us while we sink into what we need to sink into. So, you know, we have to be ready for all of this. It doesn't mean that everybody on the transitioning process is going to go through these dark places. Some people transition really well, but we never know what lies around the corner and we just need to prepare for it. It's like we just map it. So when we go into the shame process, we can look at our map and go, yeah, okay, I'm not really feeling shame. I'm quite okay with who I was, but I know where that is on the territory, but I'm going to be able to move through that. We don't suddenly go, well, I don't understand this. What am I feeling? I don't have a name for it. The imposter syndrome. You know, people often go, I'm just not good enough and I don't know what's happening. I'm highly competent in my job, but I wake up every day not feeling good enough. What's going on here? But on your map, you've got this hill, and that's called the hill of imposters. And it explains what it is and it normalizes what it is. And you go, ah, so I'm not the only one. And I think that's the important thing about the transitioning map is often we think we're the only one feeling shame. We're the only one who feels like imposters. Well, stand in line. It's like my guys said to me, a lot of my guys used to say to me, um, really, thank you for everything you've done to support us. And I don't know how you do this. And I go, well, the only difference between you and I are age, but we're both as crazy as the other. And I just bring a few more years to the process. So, you know, you're not alone. And then I often say to them, just stand in line with all of us. We all struggle with shame. We all struggle with grief. It's okay. And, you know, just hearing that we're not the only ones going through this long, challenging process, it can normalize. And I think these are critical understandings before we begin journeys. I don't know if anything's coming up in that you can add to.
Yeah, Barry, as you were saying this, what struck me is your personal reactions, because you're normally a pretty joyful person. You wear a smile mostly, you know.
Yeah.
But when you talk about being bombshelled out,
Mm.
your affect changed. So we're talking back in the 70s, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, literally in the
So,
same.
and if we, I teach interview interrogation, so I look at all the body mannerisms. So I watch your eyes and doing everything and the reaction as well. And so it's throwing those images back in your head, that mental of going through that. So, oh, how painful it was. And I thought it was interesting because you transitioned into shame as your topic afterwards. That they can be something we can carry with us for a long time. But that's okay. We can carry that. And it is, I should say, when we look at a book, it's chapters. And so that was a chapter of your life. It didn't stop your life. That chapter stopped. And then we transitioned into you immigrating, children, wife, being the Barry that we know now. But without that chapter of your life, we would not have the wonderful man that we have before us today.
Some people might disagree with that, but thank you. Well, look, I I've learned that, and I've said it in honesty, is that there's a weight that I carry behind me, and I don't, and maybe that weight is just the demands of life and change and transitioning on us. There's a kind of a weight that makes us pay attention to it, and I don't see that weight as good or bad. When we train in the military, we train with weight. When we run up hills, we run against resistance. And that, whatever it is in our backpack, that weight draws attention to things, and it can be a thing that helps us transform. Without weight, there's no resistance. Without resistance, life is easy. If life's easy, why are we going to change? So, it's my best friend. It's like I often say, my tinnitus is my best friend because it tells me when I'm not in balance. If I'm having late nights, or not looking after myself, it hisses. I thank it. It's my ally. And it's how we listen to the weights and the things that impact on us. It can be injuries. But these things, I think we carry, this illusion that we're going to wake up one day and it is just euphoric. Well, no, we are entitled to happiness. We're entitled to love and connection along the way. And we're entitled to change into something that really allows us to feel worthwhile and a sense of belonging and connected. But at the same time, there are things that we will carry till the day we die. There's always work to be done. And I think that sense of never get complacent about transitioning, the work that always needs to be done is what will make you a better person, a better father, and a better husband or a better wife. And that's an important part on this on the transitioning process. It just is. I think the thing I want to jump into as well is that part of the map of understanding is I call it operational neuroscience, is how we understand our brains. Because often we don't really understand, like guys will say to me, geez, I'm just so reactive and I'm so irritable as I'm trying to get out the military, and I don't have a job and I'm just working in a manual thing, and I'm shooting my mouth off and I can't stop it. And my friends are telling me just to pull myself together and I can't stop. And then what I do is I explain on the transitioning process. This one, the front of your brain, is what I call the OP, your observation post. So when you're in the observation post, you've got distance from what is down below. And observation posts are, in my time, we'd be up some thorny little hill, and we'd be looking down on a kraal down below and just looking at movements of people and changes in movements and whether people are carrying big bags of food out because we know that somewhere they're terrorists based. So in that place, you calm, you focused. It's actually it's a quintessence place of mindfulness because nobody talks. You try not to be visual, and you're just listening and you're tuning into your environment. So the OP is where we learn to be mindful. And practicing mindfulness is an excellent way to learn to create distance from the demands of our transitioning process and observe and think. Also in the OP position, we can plan and organize. We can't plan and organize when our world is flying chaotically around us. And I'll explain why. So we have to learn the tools that get us to the OP position. The other position we can get to is what I call the ambush position. And that's where your claymores are firing off. It's where your trip flares are going. It's high levels of alert. Now, that's the back of the brain. Now, the back of the brain is critical because if that part of the brain didn't exist, we'd get onto a train tracks, we'd see an express train coming towards us at 200 k's an hour, and the brain wouldn't know that you got to get off the tracks. You go, no, I'm cool here. I'm all right with this. And it warns us, get off. It activates the body. So there's an important component of the back of the brain in that it keeps us alive. However, the back of the brain, when it's working at a normal level, it's still sending blood to the front of the brain, the OP. So I can be walking along a trail and I can see what looks like a snake. The back of the brain activates my body. I jump out of the way and then go, no, I assess. I go OP straight away because there's blood flowing. I can look on the ground. It's a stick. Everything's all right. So activation of the back of the brain, there's enough blood flow to the front of the brain. It kicks in, it grounds us. We move on our way. However, in the transition process, and trauma is another thing, but I'm looking at the transition process where stress and anxiety are really kicking up badly. We're having panic attacks. We're on the roads and there's boxes and people and we're getting bewildered in supermarkets. We're hypervigilant. Well, if that goes up high enough, the blood flow from the ambush zone to the OP, the front of your brain, it stops. It thins out. There's almost nothing there. So now your capacity to think, plan, and organize and manage your emotions is zero. So this is why when I talk about when you don't clean the barrel of your weapon and you start having a runaway gun, which is you are ripping out at everyone around you and you can't stop, it's not that at a judgmental level, I'm out of control. Yep. But you're out of control because the front of your brain is not working anymore. It's gone. It's cooked. You ride in the back of your brain. And the thing is, your brain determines what's going to be happening. And at the same time, we have the ability to change how our brain is working through using certain body and brain-based tools. So the important thing I often say to the guys is, once we understand operational neuroscience, the challenge is on the transition process, when you are really kicking up and you are thoroughly unpleasant both to yourself and others around you, or you're dealing with overwhelming stress that's crippling you, what are you going to do? You've got to be able to kick down the back of your brain so the blood flow can go to the front of your brain. When you do that, there's like, okay, now I can think. Once you can think, you can plan forward. So there's simple things that I teach the guys. Have a drink of cold water, changes blood flow in the brain. Do some tapping, and tapping's a process we can talk about at some point. It changes the back of the brain. Box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing. There are doing some body-based modalities. There are all the body-based tools that we can use that immediately kick down the back of the brain. I even say to a lot of folk, when you are out of control, if you are out of control within yourself and those around you, whether you like it or not, get into a cold shower for 30 seconds and turn it on. It doesn't matter how cold it is. You cannot stay in your ambush zone when you've spent a few seconds in cold water, freezing cold. You can't. It's not possible. It's not possible because it immediately impacts on the brain. You can't stay in the ambush zone. It whacks it down. You come out, you're shivering, and you're going, okay, I'm back in my body. But I call that an emergency protocol. For me, when I stopped running, my wife just shakes her head. I chase discomfort. And it's probably one of my greatest gifts and one of my greatest curses that I learned on the transitioning process. Because in discomfort, I found peace. But what happens when I can't do what I used to do. So, for example, even recently in the transition process I'm having with my body, and after a knee replacement, I've had a lot of nerve pain. Why have I had nerve pain? Because my wife and I are walking 8 kilometers a day, and then I'm on my cross trainer, chasing discomfort because I love discomfort, but it's not helping me. All I'm doing is sitting with nerve pain as a result. So we have to be very careful that we don't become addicted to discomfort. We have to be able to create change without using the old tools which don't really work. So I decided that I was going to find a different kind of discomfort about 3 years ago. My challenge was I was going to stop having hot showers. I was just going to have a cold shower, summer and winter. It doesn't get freezing cold here, but summer and winter. And it's cold in winter. And that is my challenge. And I've maintained that for 3 years now. But every time I get into a cold shower, what happens is that I remember that I can control what's happening around me. I'm still in charge. I'm in the driver's seat, but it's not destructive. And in fact, the research on cold water is that we lost our capacity to heat up our internal core when we go out into cold situations. So the early days where people didn't have, warm gear and Gore-Tex, they'd maybe wrap an animal skin around them. But the minute they hit the cold, their internal core would shift and they would be warm. I eventually discovered that as an experience, in that I'd get into a cold shower and in about a millisecond, my internal core would switch on and I'd be warm. I'd feel the cold on the surface, but I would feel absolutely warm inside. And that's what discomfort in appropriate ways does, is that when we hit discomfort, your internal core, whatever that is going to be, clicks in and you become comfortable in the discomfort. But you have to find ways of metaphorically or literally physically turning on your core. Now, I thought it's easier for me, I kind of often say I'm probably the worst person because I'd never go and see a psychologist. And here I am doing what I do. But I'm happy to get into a cold shower every single day and learn that I can turn on my internal core, and that as I have that experience every day, I know that when I face discomfort around me, I can deal with it. I remember in running the ultra marathon that when I faced the edge of who I was, it still reminds me that it's not that I'm going to suffer, but I'll manage it. I'll come through it. And these are the tools that we want to develop as we are transitioning. And again, I'll say it is the learnings that you will have in the transitioning process are the greatest gifts that will follow you for the rest of your life. It's not just military to civilian world. It's military till the day you no longer are here. So, I mean, it's a lot we've covered today, but if anything's coming up, I don't want to go into anything more, but if anything's coming up around that, Jason or Sarah.
Yeah, Barry, I think it's interesting you talked about the runaway gun. I love a lot of your analogies about gun because we can understand it if we're a first responder or military.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I would train my guys, or soldiers, I should say, to use multiple machine guns, you have to teach them the runaway gun procedures. I personally have never had a runaway gun, but I know what to do if it happened. And even when I trained all my people to go to Afghanistan and they were all working with special forces, they're like, sir, it was just like you trained us. We went from this weapon system to this weapon system to this weapon system, and they all came home. So what a blessing for that. But it's through that training. And what I look at what you discuss about discomfort. We're all going to go through a discomfort. But what I repetitively hear in what you're saying is you're in control of your discomfort. You've decided how far you're going to push yourself in that walking, in the running, in whatever, the cold water. And you have that power to change that. And that's what we have to realize, that if we go from our inside, we have the ability to change whatever is affecting us. And again, going back to Viktor Frankl, it's our mindset on this one.
Correct.
And yep, it could all be going south, but you know what? I'm going to smile anyways because I'm
Yeah.
here.
So we know that on the transitioning process, it's going to go south. So when we're in the transition, when it goes south, it goes here. So you're not going to think your way out of your southern position. You have to body base yourself out of your southern position. So simple, do what makes you uncomfortable. If really you can't find anything, get in a cold shower. You're not going to like it, but it's either get in the cold shower or acknowledge that you choose to stay where you are. And the message is we're not victims in this process. We're not. Victims don't change. If we believe the world is persecuting us, and we believe that on this transition process, nobody likes us, nobody wants to give us work, well, if we continue to hold that modality, it's okay to have that belief system. It's just what you do with it. But if you decide you're going to hold on to that, then you get what you hold on to. And I think it's important sometimes to have a hard look at ourselves and ask us whether we are now choosing to stay where we are, or whether we acknowledge that we've had a rough deal, but we still have some power to do with what we face, to do something with what we're facing. Within that is hope. And, the transitioning process is so hard, and 40 people a day are not killing themselves for nothing. They're killing themselves because on this journey, they lost hope. And the important thing we need to do, and at the point at which you lose hope, is the point at which there's actually almost nothing left to do. And that's the hard thing. And that's where sometimes we do get to a point on the transition process where there is nothing we can do because everything has locked down. And at that point, if you've made the attempt before you begin the journey to lock in with tribe, you have people that watch those that get to the place where they lose hope completely. Because that's where your buddies come, and that little voice can encourage you to take the weapon out of your mouth, or get somebody to pick you up and take you in to a VA hospital or whatever you would use on. And I acknowledge that, the things I've talked about today, some people get to points where everything I've said is just simply going to be useless. But that's where tribe comes in. Without tribe, we lost. When you take an animal out of tribe, they lost, unless they're solitary creatures. And human beings are the same thing. We can't transition on our own or alone. We can be alone, we can be on our own, but in the presence of others. And it's the same like when you're running long distance. You're running, it's one of the most profound sense of aloneness in the presence of others, because you can feel desperation because you've run out of all your carbohydrates, and you're just drawing on internal energy. But every time you pass somebody, you're getting a slap on the back, or you encouraging people. And the combination of that loneliness and the desperation of what do I draw on with people that are holding us in there brings us across the finishing line. And I think if we didn't have that, I don't know, I think without the people I was running with, I'm not sure I would have crossed that finishing line. I knew how to deal with discomfort and pain, but I can't deny the power of the tribe that were running with me and I with them. And so tribe is critical. Where tribe gets activated and we catch people, then maybe that 40 doesn't need to be 40 anymore. And that's why we need to embed, you need to embed yourself on the transitioning process in tribe, in an organization. An organization, Sarah, your organization. Jason, you and I also live in different other gatherings. These are things where people are surrounded by open hearts and strong arms. So yeah, it's a lot. That was a big conversation. I must have had a moment today. um,
Great. It was great stuff. Yeah. Appreciate it. I think
No,
it's going to deeply resonate with people who listen, and it's a gift.
well, the gift, the conversations that we all have in the wonderful communities we belong in that are listened to by others, it's this ripple effect. It's, every conversation is like dropping a pebble in a pond. It ripples well beyond the small community that we form. It goes and ripples into the wider community. And one day, somebody sitting in a dark room, wondering whether he's going to last another 5 minutes, might just listen to that and find hope and courage to stay alive. So, we're rippling, and that's the goal, Sarah, Jason. I mean, for me, this is my mission, is this transitioning process, because I can see I've put so much work into myself over so many years, and I can still feel the edges of it just whispering to me at times, and I can still see when I misbehave. They're rare moments, and when I do it extremely well. Not in my relationship. In my relationship, I go away and I take a deep breath, and then I come back and regroup. But I can see in work environments sometimes, I can watch myself, or even parenting, I could watch myself going, really? So we always have to be vigilant. If you're not vigilant, then stuff sneaks out, eh? It just does. So looking forward to catching up with everybody in a week's time. And I do hope that something that came up today will resonate with you. And also, I haven't finished reading Mark's book, but it looks like an awesome book, and he's an awesome human being.
Yeah.
So thank you all for today.
Thank you so much.